Back to week 5 and what I learned in tech this week. This week I was back in Linux. This time working on figuring out RDP in Linux, which if you're not familiar, RDP is a remote desktop protocol. It's used to connect from Windows machine to Windows machine. However, I wanted to leverage it from connecting from a Windows machine to a Linux machine. And I know, I told you in week 1 in the first Linux episode not to use the desktop version of Linux. However, I'm trying to inject Linux in my everyday workflow. And this week I chose to replace a Windows virtual machine that I use every day with a Linux virtual machine. This virtual machine is predominantly accessed via RDP. So it's strictly used for me to access it via RDP and perform work there. So I set on a task to replace it with a Linux virtual machine, and I ran into quite a few challenges. All the newer Linux distributions use Wayland. And I'm not going to try to explain Wayland because it's extremely complicated and I don't really even understand it. But from my understanding, it has something to do with the inputs and outputs and way graphical things are drawn on the desktop in Linux. And that complicates the usage of RDP because RDP essentially consumes a session rather than typically just doing like a screen mirror, which is what I've found that Wayland kind of tries to do. So the native RDP that's built into those new distributions, and it does like its screen mirroring thing, it works, but not very well. It's really slow and clunky, and there's all kinds of complications with it. So I wanted one that used XRDP, which is kind of like the Linux version or free version of RDP, that worked and functioned much more like the traditional RDP protocol. So I had to land on and go back, and I landed on Linux Mint Cinnamon because it still uses X11 instead of Wayland. So I was able to get XRDP up and running with the help of a couple very nice Reddit and Linux Mint forum posts, and I was able to get XRDP running to my liking. So by default, it runs pretty quickly, but I wanted to speed it up and make it perform as much like Windows RDP as possible, and I was able to get it there. And I'll link those 2 posts in the description below. So officially, that pesky Windows machine has been replaced with Linux Mint Cinnamon. So that's what I learned this week in tech. What did you learn? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next week.